Thank you. Madam Chairperson, the Honorable Minister, Srimati Smriti Irani ji, Dr. Anirban Ganguly, distinguished guests, and the organizers of Lokmanthan, who I would like to thank in particular for the opportunity to participate in this Manthan on modernity and lifestyle. The biggest problem with modernity today is that it has been hyphenated with lifestyle, which unfortunately defeats our understanding of what modernity means. It has today come to be associated almost entirely with the superficial. This is not something that I understood earlier, certainly not in my teenage years. I bought the packaging of what it meant to be modern fully, hook, line, and sinker, and festooned myself with the manifestations that I believed stood for modernity. It could be something as small as what I chose to wear, or it could be something bigger or more drastic, things that I wanted to say, or things that I even wanted to do. Even if those things didn't agree with who I was as a person. I see it all the time, even today. I see it with younger men and women who are trying to define themselves and make a place for themselves in the world. And I understand why they're doing that. And when I understand why they're doing that, is because I've been through that myself. And that is one reason when it comes to modernity, I don't quite judge them for it. And it is also the reason why I particularly welcome this opportunity to speak on this subject. Because when we link modernity to lifestyle, what we end up doing is unleashing an anxiety that is so profound because it places a need on people to conform, to redefine ourselves over and over and over again, to keep up with the times and to keep up with others. So what is modernity? Is it what we wear or how we speak? Is it about fitting in? Or is it, as the philosopher Nietzsche defined it, a crisis of values, and more specifically, the demise of traditional values? Philosophers through the ages and across geographies have grappled with modernity, celebrating it, lamenting it for what it is truly. And this is what we don't define it as, but what we must define it as. Modernity is a paradigm shift in human thinking and in the relationships that we have as human beings. That is the essence of modernity, which prevails through the ages, through the times. This shift has opened the door. It's opened the door to technology, to medical science, to many advancements. It has improved our lives. It has ushered in also what the famous writer Kafka enunciates in his many works as the robotic existence of man, the art or the compulsion of doing, the routines that make us conform from the time we wake up to when we go to our workplace, how we are expected to be there. We're standardized, process-driven, goal-oriented, automatons of delivery. Modernity has in many ways dehumanized us, as Kafka writes so very often in different ways. It has made us much like the machines that have replaced us in many workplaces through the ages. But this, or at least my presentation today, is not meant to be a criticism of modernity, but a deeper exploration of it. As we sit here today, we are all beneficiaries of this modernity, and we all assume to know what it means. But that, unfortunately, is only human arrogance. Since what we essentially are co-travelers in the continuum of time, condemned to be dated as well at some point in time, when posterity looks back on us. Our modern age today will be history for another generation of human beings. Our modern values that we call modern today will be traditional for this future generation of human beings. Hence, it is essential that when we define what is modern, We do not look at it from the dichotomous position of modern versus traditional and assume that embracing one means rejecting the other in its entirety. More importantly, we must be careful about what we reject and why we reject it, since what we consider modern today will be archaic tomorrow, and what is tradition today was once considered modern in another age. Confusing? In the words of David Miller, the author of Modernity in Hindu Monasticism, Swami Vivekananda, and the Ramakrishna movement, I think he says it beautifully, and I think he says exactly what I'm trying to say here. What he says is that by emphasizing certain directions in which non-Western societies are assumed to move and qualities or values they are assumed to acquire, such theories focus attention upon structural differences and implied incompatibilities between the old and the new, rather than upon processes of adaptation. And thus they produce an analytic gap between tradition and modernity. Tradition and modernity then become static and opposed categories. That is, to become modern requires discarding old institutions and ways of life. And that is why we must think of these terms not in opposition to each other, since their definitions change with time, but instead consider the subject from the perspective of shared human values, which will withstand the vagaries of time and be timeless and essential to human existence. The purpose of my presentation today was to underline how very often we see modernity in the context of lifestyle alone, thereby restricting our understanding of it and diminishing the fact that it is, in essence, a shift in human thinking and relationships. To work with that shift, we must acknowledge it. On the other hand, by setting up modernity against tradition, we are on the path to not adaptability and shared values, but to constant conflict. If we are to preserve, persevere, move forward, carrying with us the wisdom we have been bequeathed by our heritage, our culture, in the timeless wisdom of the Vedas, and I could keep going on here. But what we must be assured of is that the essential humanity of this wisdom will prevail. But more importantly, it will thrive when separated from moral judgment and diktat. The way forward of reconciling these two, modernity and tradition, that has vexed thinkers, writers, philosophers around the world, even depressed and frightened them as we march ahead, forgetting our humanity, becoming more efficient, healthier, longer living, and the values we choose to leave behind. It is time to move away from the battle of modernity versus tradition. This week, two things happened. Hillary Clinton, a woman candidate, lost the US presidential elections. She was considered the stronger candidate, the progressive one, with modern values. When she made her official campaign announcement, it was a 40-minute long speech, and the words that kept popping up repeatedly was family values. The shrine of these values that I've been speaking of for the last few minutes, is the family. And she kept repeating that. The one thing that she said, and became a bit of a catchphrase during her campaign, was, "When our family is strong, America is strong." It's a universal principle. 800 kilometers from here, today, Rashtriya Sevika Samiti has a Prerna Shivir in New Delhi. Over 2,500 women from all over the country are participating in this Prerna Shivir. One of the main points of discussion at this Shivir will be family values and the role it plays in nation building. Our modern media today will root for Hillary Clinton all the way in America, but sneers at the emphasis of family values at home. This is the hypocrisy the lack of understanding of modernity that we need to combat, that we need to challenge, that we need to call out in order to move ahead. It is this reconciliation even between the two, as we define lifestyles and ourselves, which will prove to be the greatest challenge. And the resolution will not come from conflict, but from understanding and inclusiveness, and from peeling away the layers of hypocrisy that dominates our discourse. In understanding ourselves as human beings, in the context of our times, but more importantly, in the context of our culture, which has conquered time and survived for thousands and thousands of years, despite occupation and imposition of values on the edge of a sword. It has still survived and exists to this day. Our values and our culture have survived those times, and they will survive these times. But the path to celebrating, to thriving these values needs to be one of inclusiveness and understanding, even if we do not receive it in return. For that will be the rightful homage to the greatest mother of all, Bharat Mata. And in this silent and patient pursuit lies the real task of nation building. Thank you.